Good morning, all. When Yesha suggests that I look and write an issue on the history of venture, I could not think about any other way but to pick up events and through the events to start to put some theme around it. As Yesha properly said, the reason to look at the past is that if you don't know where you are coming from, not sure that you know where you are going. And one criticism that I got was, why did you stop at 100 years? Which is opposite to the point, don't look at the past at all. As economists, you used to run regressions. When you run regressions, you look, at some points and then to do the trajectory going farther. So you do need to look at the past. Rarely you go that long in economics, rarely. But I took it seriously after the original study. And in the last few days, I decided to go back, to be exact, 2.4 million years. And to see, is there anything that I can learn from 2.4 million years minus 100 that can also shed light and be related to the conversation I'm going to run in a second. So this is largely drawn from a book by Yuval Noah Harari, but not only. And essentially, as you can see, this is the history of humankind. The human beings have been for 2.4 million, as I said. The Homo sapiens, as we know them, only 6% of that time, which is just a mere 150,000 years. About half that time since then, something happened, and a conscious notion called cognitive emerged, okay? Basically saying people are ingenious, they are creative. And that comes back to the idea of venture, and I will point out more of this. So the moment people are creative, they start to populate the plant, and all the rest of the mammals start to disappear or to go into cages. So that's 70,000 years ago. Jumping fast forward, another major breakthrough is the agricultural revolution, where people changed from being gatherers and hunters into farming. Then came the scientific revolution with the Renaissance 500 years ago, names like Bernoulli, to mention one, and other mathematicians later. And halfway through that, the Industrial Revolution came, which triggered, again, a major change, particularly in Europe, about the way people live. 50 years ago, we got the Information Revolution, and now we are at the beginning of a new one, that is the biotechnological revolution, which, according to some people, and Harari is one of them, but not only, Ray Kurzweil, the futurist of Google, is another one, actually calls for the end of the humankind the way we know it. And actually we'll get into, whether you like it or not, this is what's supposed to happen. But that's really the future. I'm here to talk about the past. But at least, I don't know if this is good or bad, to be immortal and to live forever as some kind of some digital units. One thing you don't need to worry about is what Yesha said, is the interpersonal of human people in the coffee shops. That probably will not be there anymore. What I pick up from that, from reading a little bit about beyond the 100 years, which will be my focus, is the importance of language. Language became very, very important. The ability to communicate in large groups, beyond one or two birds talking to each other or having some signals, going into large groups, is the ability to assess, assemble, assimilate abstract matters, and to make corporations in large teams. And again, we'll see this cooperation very important when it comes to venture as well. One thing which I picked up, and for the life of me I don't understand that, is gossip. Apparently, humankind are the only ones who can gossip. I don't know how they know that and why it is so important, but so be it. And finally, and that's also a very important lesson to the remaining of my lecture, is the importance of the ecosystem, which is basically including the financials, monetary terms, money, credit, and the rise of capitalism. This has been a very important component along that history. And it's funny because when we look at the zoom in on the last 100 years for our context, we'll see this becoming very relevant. So as we move, am I in the right place? Yeah. So again, there are people, maybe biased, like Dyson, Professor physicist Freeman Dyson, who said that technology is the second most important gift of God after life. Okay, because with technology we can generate civilizations, art, and science. However, again, I'm jumping to the bottom here, is the other thing to me that is very important is the social fabric. And social fabric means, again, it's universities, it's institutions, it's banks, stock market, ability to raise funding, government. Without government, we'll have no enforcement of law. Patents, that's all related to it. And without it, I don't know exactly what venture really would mean and how would it be sustainable. So that's by way of preliminary comments. Now, in terms of the study itself, as I said, the easiest way for me is to focus on events because I'm not a historian by background. And we took a very holistic view. And I'll just talk a little bit about the methodology because it's quite important here. And then I'll pick up a few specific events and focus on them. I think as the general counsel probably said, venture means many things to many people, okay? And maybe that's why it's a very diffusing term. And that's why I'm very happy with it for the College Institute of Venture because really we would like to capture different angles at different points. But it does mean uncharted water, absolutely. It's everything that got to do with some element of risk, okay, uncertainty. More in a positive way than in a negative way. Well, in terms of, this has been the motivation I discussed in detail. In terms of the focus, the unique aspect, unlike any other study on the history of technology or patents or whatever, is that we don't look just at innovations, outcomes, results, but we also look at drivers, okay? What are the really the influences? What is the ecosystem? What are the specific elements that actually were particularly major as enablers for these outcomes and innovations to happen? That's for us equally important. In some sense, I would say it's even more important because these are the ones you want to generate. The rest will probably follow, okay? So that's one point. Second is the fact that, yeah, so we talk about this. In terms of the period of time, I already mentioned, we had to put some limits here. Well, we decided to go with 100 years, again, just to have a limit, but we could do it in terms of the length of time. We could not do it in terms of the breadth. And the breadth of events that you'll see that you saw in that accordion is very large. The original number was 147. I kept it like that. Now it's 160. It probably will change. And as you can see here, there are, split between inputs and outputs, so to speak, between enablers and results. I'll pick up a few of those. No need to worry about the details here. It's an ongoing project. It's very subjective, of course, and it's very dynamic. So let's see. The one comment that I do wish to make is about the geography. And the geography clearly is tilting to the US and to the West. Now, that could be a bias. I don't think so, to be honest. I think that, yes, we are, Western-oriented. Those people, me in particular, who were engaged in the study. I read English, I collect the data from there. I don't read Asian languages, and, there is a bias. Having said that, I think it's not a big surprise to see that the dominance of the US and after that coming the UK, Germany, and the rest of Europe I think the reason is because of the role of the governments, the role of the large platforms. NASA is one of them, okay? The Cold War, etc. They are very dominating elements, and they gave rise to both large corporations, and second is innovation of a major scale that I will talk about. So I don't think it's just a bias. Yes, there could be pockets. We try very hard, especially on Asia, to come up with stuff. So Temasek, as the major program by Singapore, has been identified as one. We have a few others. By all means, being here where we are, and I say it anywhere I go, you know, if you think we missed some major events that did influence venture on a global sense, by all means, let us know. Whether cyber city will be one of them or not, I cannot include it yet, but somebody, maybe, well, you know, next generation will decide that this is becoming one of those. Who knows? But definitely, this is, again, changing. The rest of the world so far is not very well represented. Japan is a bit, and it's all there. Anyway, that's in terms of the general statistics. And let me just move. On the criteria. Well, the criteria are, and this is for the discovery and for the innovation. First of all, clearly we pick up events that are significant on their own merit. I'll pick up a few for medicine because then it's a kind of clear cut. IVF, in vitro fertilization, was considered to be included. The coronary stent was counted as major event, that's really saved people after heart attacks and so on and so forth. That's kind of important. Then there are the disruptive matters. And the disruptive could be, for instance, the human genome or the DNA fingerprinting, etc. So these are not particularly solution to a problem, but something that is truly disruptive in a major way. And again, just happen to be in medicine that I use these examples. Then there are the enablers and the platforms, which are on top of what they are actually opening more doors, and as a result, they are multipliers in terms of the influence over there. To some extent, the penicillin counts twice. It's such a huge thing because it's not only phenomenal, problem, but solver, but it's also really opening all the antibiotics line that took, the last almost 80 years as a platform. The last, which is the least trivial one, is commercialization. For us, for me, it was very, very important to pick up innovations that actually made a lot of impact on commercialization. And if I had to choose where was the event, the patent, the invention itself, or the commercialization, I picked up the commercialization. One example that I will discuss later in detail is Model T, Ford Model T, all right? Which is the more important than the car itself, which is what, the invention of the combustion engine and so on. The other example that I will give here, event that entered in almost the last minute, is on that ground only, is BASIC. It's one computer language. Why would BASIC be here? I don't think I have C++ or COBOL. They're not there. The reason is because what BASIC did is to move programming from the hands of the programmers into the mob, okay, into everybody's life. So that was the language 50 years ago, almost exactly, 51, 2 by now, that actually was used later on for the workstations and for the PCs, and Microsoft uses to design the MS-DOS and HP and IBM. So all of these were based on BASIC. And again, for me, this is commercialization. This is moving that on a major scale that all of us can use now, laptops and PCs, and not just go back, those of you who may remember, 40 years ago, where you had to give it to somebody to program code in a university, in some basement over there, as I remember from my own times as a student in the engineering school. That's very important in terms of making an impact. We are totally, and last word about this commercialization, am I on the right page? See, I moved already. Is the fact that these are really the ones that make the tectonic shifts, okay? And again, the Model T, you'll see that in a minute. Lastly is regarding the, which is actually the right place, we have to be actually quite agnostic regarding where is the innovation coming, okay? In other words, it need not be from startups. In fact, most of the innovations came from large government schemes. Most of the money which went to R&D came from governments. The big parks, technological parks, and the large corporations. So lots comes from there in terms of those who make the big impact, especially as some of them involve a tremendous amount of resources to be produced. All right. I discussed commercialization, biases. Biases are many. One is time distance. Clearly, we know more about the last 20 years than we know about 80 years ago. Okay? It's very difficult to know what really happened here. So clearly, the resolution is, exactly like in a camera, is much more resolution to the last 10 years. So for us, events that happened there in the last 10 years are viewed as important. Or the last 20 years. And it's quite possible that many of them will disappear as unimportant, or the difference will be. So just one example, Oracle and SAP, okay? From today's point of time, they are maybe as two major corporations that do very different stuff. I'm pretty sure that in 50 years from now, if they still stay in the list, they may disappear, they will be viewed as one event. Some kind of big data management in large organizations, that sort of enterprise systems. Again, things that are like and I'll come to that, the Sony Walkman, that was a big event some times ago, not viewed today as important at all, okay? And that's the nature of the bias that we have in terms of where the time we are. Of course, the other thing is that we have the challenge and a bit about, going down here, is about the new events that were just invented, and we cannot judge whether they're important or not. I'll give you just a few examples. Crowdfunding didn't get the list because I didn't think it's important. I may be wrong. On the other hand, the finding the Higgs boson, the last element that was not known, the Higgs particle. I included it because everybody was so excited about it. I still don't know what you do with this. And that may turn out to be just a fad, not very different from others. But I gave kudos to science and included it. What I did not include is the Bitcoin, because it's too early to tell. I think it's a fad. That's my opinion. Others think differently. Clearly paying a lot of money, just jumped a few days ago, big time. Certainly too early to tell. But that's the nature of the beast. There is nothing to do about it. History should judge. In terms of omissions, well, let's talk about incrementality. Incrementality is a very interesting matter. There are lots of areas where discoveries are not major jumps. When it comes to IT, not only that we are biased, IT against material science, for example, okay, that's a major bias, at least for, I bet, most of the people in the room. Not Yael, but most of the others. So for us, the big names coming from Silicon Valley, we all know. We all know the Oracles, we all know the HPs, When it comes to other stuff, well, it's very different. When it comes to material, when it comes to other type of industries. So we had to work very hard, and we had to judge, to trust the judge of other people. For example, the graphene discovered. Okay, now it's more talking about, because the idea, now people talk about graphene to replace the batteries. This is a solution to the car batteries, in the electrical cars, that this will be it, and using a lot of It's fantastic for sustainability because instead of all this acid liquid, you are going to get just graphene and air. So graphene is more known. When we did the study, at least for me, graphene was not known as much. The other one is float glass process. People tell me it's very, very important. I included it. They also got the Nobel, by the way. But getting the Nobel was not a criteria. We did not go that way. We just looked at it independently. And if they got the Nobel, it's kind of assurance. So, there are these sort of, again, biases as to what we know, and most of us, and what we know less. Again, the IT versus the iPhones of the world, and the Ciscos of the world, and the Amazon, everybody familiar. Almost becoming not interesting as when it comes to the material, medicine, that's a different story. But I tell you one area where I found this particularly difficult, and that's the most mundane industries. The problem there is lack of disruptive changes. There are changes, but they are very incremental. I'm talking about constructions, okay, materials, non-electrical engineering of all kinds, agricultural, processes, equipment, okay, home appliances. In all of these areas, it is extremely difficult to pinpoint a point of jump. And I tried hard. I tried really, for instance, to get being Israeli, to put Israel on the map. I was thinking about desalination. There was a guy named Zarkin who came with desalination. I thought, he deserves credit. I could not give him the credit. The reason is that desalination goes back to the times of the Romans. He did not discover anything big. Okay, I could not, and he's not listed there. It has been a very gradual change. I checked all the dams in the world, all the roads, all of them to see has there been anything of major jump, building materials, construction, bridges. Could not identify one that is big enough as a change. Lucky enough that I find out with the air conditioning, which is very important for our life. We cannot imagine our life without air conditioning in most parts of the world, right? Let's not forget about this kind of stuff. Well, it was before the 100 years, so I couldn't include it, but the Freon was invented. And that because before the Freon, it was very explosive, so it was not allowed to be used. So that made the commercialization of it of large scale, and that is included here. But it's a kind of very difficult. Laundry machine and all of these are not. Another one that I was very proud finding that you usually don't think about is the ATM machine. Again, try to think about our life as ATM without that, and credit. Subjectivity is the next issue, and the last one here. I'll just give you one example. When we did a study, CNBC came with their own study about the top, how many events they had? I think 9. 10. They had top 10 events in the last 105 years, for whatever reason, 105, I don't know. 9 of them came within our period of 100 years. Okay, now they have 9, we had 147 at that time. You would expect all these 9s will be included, right? I mean, obviously, these are top 9. The answer was that only 4 were included, which is weird. 5 of them, I did not include. Even after I saw them, I didn't say, oh my God, I made a mistake. I did not include. I'll give you one example. The Concorde, the jet. I didn't think it's important. They included it. Okay. The Sony Walkman, they included. I did not include. So there is a bias. There is subjectivity. Nothing to do about. The one thing that is important, and I will emphasize later on, is the impact of global political forces, particularly wars. The institutionalization that I mentioned before, generating the enterprise, the platforms for disruptives, they are very important. I mentioned NASA already, the Cold War that is behind NASA, Xerox Spark and others. They are extremely important for deep innovation. It's not just the startups that are there. I will also give kudos to the individuals. With all the respect to the institutions, still there are individuals. And we should not forget the impact of the individuals. And finally is the multidisciplinary element, which is, you know, I was thinking this is a new phenomenon. Certainly universities were not multidisciplinary for a long period of time. They became recently. I thought this is a new phenomenon until, again, I came back to the study of the 2 million years where I saw the language. And the language is basically allow people to communicate. So from now on, I will focus on examples. So these are a few selected events, but even here, within that list, let me pick up, in the interest of time, just a few to one of a kind, all right? How much time I have?
5 minutes.
No way. No way.
7 because you are my friend.
I'm your boss. And a friend. So that's 70. Whatever I can buy time. Okay, quickly then. Bell Labs. Bell Labs, I don't know. Who heard here? I will ask you several times. Who heard the name Bell Labs? Not from me. Okay, you did. Okay. It was put together jointly by AT&T and Western Electric. AT&T at that time was known by the name Bell. And it was a scientific center, primarily in New Jersey, where there were semi-academic, really a lot of scholars, researchers, hundreds of people, if not thousands of them. And it was truly multidisciplinary. And if you go through the list of innovations that came from there, it's just astonishing, right? You got the radio, astronomy, laser, transistor, information theory, Unix operation system, several programming languages, all were developed there. I'm not saying exclusively there, but the contribution there is just unbelievable, with a lot of home runs. Anti-craft missiles, Apollo program, even many things, they really had a free hand to do whatever they want. I was interviewed, by the way, for Bell Lab, and they told me when I was in the job market after my PhD in the United States, and the interview there was, you can do whatever you want. You don't need to teach. You just sit there, you just think about, you can cooperate with other people or not, it's up to you. And the funny part is that the reason for that, why did they have the Bell Lab? The reason is that AT&T at that time was a monopoly. As a monopoly, they had to pay back to society. One way they decided to do that is through establishing this sort of research park for humankind. And basically, again, the results were absolutely phenomenal. 7 Nobel Prizes came out of that, awarded for people who did the work over there. And again, I emphasize the interdisciplinary. Second example is now time for individual. Now, before I go here, let me just go back a second. People associate the biggest name in the history of Silicon Valley is William Shockley, Bill Shockley, with the Shockley Laboratories. And those of you who remember from the stories of the Valley, there are the Fairchild. These are people who left the Shockley Laboratories. They were unhappy there, and known as the Treacher 8, who actually left, and they include Gordon Moore, who then established Intel and behind the Moore Law, and Kleiner, Eugene Kleiner, who was one of the founders of Kleiner Perkins, of course, et cetera, and 6 more. Now, God help me, the guy is dead, but the truth has to be said. Bill Shockley got nothing to do with the spirit of the Valley and entrepreneurship. He's ingenious, no doubt about that, inventing of semiconductors and whatever, but he was paranoid. He didn't know how to manage people. He did not know how to deal with people. His children did not know that he died until a few weeks after that. Except for his wife, nobody attended the funeral. Terrible man in comes to interpersonal skills. Again, genius, that's separate. Well, so there is nothing between him as a character and the spirit of the Valley, as we all know it to be, and what it's supposed to be. So who is the hero? And the hero is an unsung hero. This is the man, Fred Terman. Anybody heard the name Fred Terman? 3. Well, I discount you, and I discount you, so maybe 1. Fred Terman was the Dean of Engineering at Stanford. And he identified that university is beyond just a place of education. And essentially, first of all, he placed HP, 2 of his postdoctoral students, Hewlett and Packard, they were his students, and he proposed that they will establish the company nearby Stanford, which was a major revolutionary thing to do. And then after that, he started recruiting more and more companies into this sort of campus, into this industrial park that he established there. All right? And that included Varian, that was the first one. I mentioned HP, Eastman Kodak, General Electric, Lockheed, and and these are large corporations. So you can see this is not necessarily startups. This guy is the single-hand man behind the success of the Silicon Valley for all what it means to the United States and to the world of venture as a whole, okay? He is really the architect of that. He is the one who converted the whole area around Stanford from being orchards into a community. Because on top of moving the companies there, he understood that people need to also live there. So he talked to the real estate moguls of the area to start developing neighborhoods there. He talked to Stanford to release land for that purpose and to the farmers. And following the houses, he came with the concept of that there need to be shopping centers over there and a variety of other services. So this becomes really a peninsula, a hotbed for innovation, okay? And the model of cluster as we know it since then. And again, very modest, one individual that came with all of these concepts. So there are individuals as well, not just governments, not just technology per se. Again, because of the interest of time, I will just skip all the way to the last one, and that's the hippie movement. And I'll explain why I pick. You see, I pick up a lot of, again, social and ecosystems elements that are drivers and enablers. Now, let me explain this one, because here the three, I don't think anybody did before the connection. It's kind of interesting to talk about, after the Fair children, from Fairchild, to talk about the Flower children, which we have here. So what happened here? Put yourself in time to the early 60s. We are here post-traumatic time in the United States, where JF Kennedy was assassinated. They are starting now to get more and more into the mess of Vietnam. We have the crisis missiles with the Russians, with Cuba, all of these problems going on there. And there is a lot of distrust to politicians, okay? People start to avoid going to being drafted, and instead they went and continued education beyond undergraduate into graduate and PhDs. Okay, it was done deliberately to avoid and in resenting politicians and big governments. So we started to see much more liberal views among the youth in America, and certainly later on in the world, or in parallel from other places. And we, parallel to that, we saw also in the UK and elsewhere, in the 60s, this period of the Beatles, free love, pop, LSD, all kind of stuff was going around, and the hippie movement came particularly in San Francisco, as you know. Well, think about it. That's not a coincidence that the hippie movement was concentrated around Berkeley and in San Francisco, and the Silicon Valley happened to be in the same neighborhood, more or less. It is not a coincidence. Because what that period of the free love, hippie, you name it, of the late 60s did is to open up people, that more is allowed. And one of the things that is allowed is not only to to be not to shave, let's call it this way, let's keep it modest, or to dress in a strange, colorful, and to play strange music, but also not to work for Lockheed, not to work for the large corporations. People are allowed to be what they are, to be creative, and to be individualistic, and to stay work at home, cherish lifestyle. So we saw a lot of startups in the valley at the same time that were there. Again, there was much more free spirit, the spirit of entrepreneurship. And again, it was primarily the valley. And many of them are eccentric people. They don't fit into the large corporate world. All of a sudden, they were flourishing, working on their own. As last anecdote here, I would just say, well, 1 minute, is the fact of the Zen movement in California. And this is related to, again, the attitude that was about embracing the foreigner. America has been fantastic all throughout its livelihood to embrace immigrants. But there always was the melting pot to make them Americans. This changed. It changed with George Harrison playing, the sitar and being a student there of Ravi Shankar. It's played with the Zen, the Japanese, sort of religious cultures affecting California. And it means that the foreigners are, and I'm talking specifically about now the Asia, Far East, are embraced with their own culture. So it's not only having them and make them look like us, or behave like us, but also that bring values that we don't have. This openness is absolutely related to the spirit of entrepreneurship. And I finish with, I don't have time to talk about the birth of the computer, which is a fascinating story. Which one is the first, which one is not. 4 competitors for that. I can speak about that enough for time. But I'll talk about the ENIAC. That's probably the one that is the most capable, the bigger of general use, that is the first full-fledged computer. And it was so big, I have here, I think, the statistics, is 17,000 vacuum tubes, 70,000 resistors, and the list goes on and on. 5 million hand soldier joints, 27 tons. The rumors are that when it was lit, the lights in Philadelphia were dimmed because of the amazing amount of electricity at that time it was consumed. So that's a gigantic thing. Well, and here I'm finishing with a question to you guys. Who were the first computers? Now, those of you who heard me before, don't say. The human beings. Any particular type of human beings? Female. These are the first computers. And the reason is as follows. During the war, it was developed during the war, Second World War, and they recruited primarily female to that, scientists, graduate students in physics, in mathematics and elsewhere, clearly because the boys were sent to the front. The bias here was that 90% of them were actually female, very few male. So really, this first computer were handed in a very solid hands of very smart female. And they were called computers because, that's the way in English. You say gardener, and you say engineer, and you say computer. They were computing. So I will stop on this point. Sorry.